Let's do a quick announcement. I'm gonna introduce you, then feel free. Come on up and then I'll click through your slides. Just give me the cues, that way you can focus on
Okay, cool.
if that helps you out.
Or if you want to just I mean, if I can do it, I will.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, just
Okay.
it's meant to be interactive.
Okay.
I want to stop and ask questions, and then I even have a question. And is this all dry erase board behind me?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So I want to
Draw.
pop a quiz to the students.
Sure, that's good.
And then hopefully nobody get mad at me after the exam they had today.
It was funny.
Went out the room traumatized because I popped the quiz and had the damn managed test.
No, you know what? Actually, we had Rich Thompson a few weeks back speak to us virtually, and he's like, you know what? I'm going to ask you guys a question. But we never got to it, so this is good. Yeah. It's fine.
Cool. All right, cool. I'll be right back.
Yep, all good. Did you put it recording? Is there something that you all can tell me at the end of the presentation who wants me to send an email? Because I can send it out.
Okay.
Do you want to make something?
Yeah. I got your email. I'll just send you a list of people who I think might want to see it. So probably just a couple. My supervisor, my WCM.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so just about 3:30. Yes. So thank you guys so much for coming in on a Friday, and what a great turnout. Honestly, I really appreciate you guys being here. I know, again, it's been a pretty busy day for a lot of us, so thank you guys for taking the time to be here. Just one quick announcement, more so of a shout out. I want to thank you guys for those that went to Panda yesterday to help us fundraise for the AMS chapter. Thank you to those who shouted us out on whether it was social media or simply just going there and, spending money on Panda for us. So that goes a long way, especially for us as an organization. Any money we can get really helps us out in the long term in terms of how we do our meetings, in terms of being able to attend conferences down the road. That really does go a long way. So thank you guys for your support. Of course, we're going to have other opportunities for fundraisers too. So keep that on the radar. This will definitely not be the last one. So again, thank you guys for your support. Without further ado, I wanted to go ahead and introduce Dr. Cook. He is joining us, of course, from the WPC. And thank you for taking a lot of time out of your day today to be here. Of course, you work at the WPC. You've had experience working at the Storm Prediction Center. And he's joining us today to not only talk about sort of his career, but also some advice for us. And word down the street is we might have a little bit of pop quiz for us in the audience, but I'm not going to spoil that. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Cook.
I don't want to traumatize the students that won that dynamics exam a little earlier. I heard it was kind of rough for some, so apologies in advance. But anyway, it's an honor to be here and to kind of share my story and hopefully give you guys some tips to take home with you and help you as you navigate your career at this stage of your career and then beyond, and go out and do great things. So I'm born and raised in Little Rock, Arkansas. Let's see, I'll start the slides here. There you go. There you go. All right. So I'm born and raised in Little Rock, Arkansas. At the very tip of that arrow, that's a problem, right? There were several long track tornadoes that occurred on this day in 1997. So I just dated myself as relatively old compared to the undergrad, but it's okay. This actually wasn't my first encounter with weather. When I was 3 years old, my mom and I lived in a mobile home in Southwest Little Rock that got hit by a tornado. And I remember it picking us up. And of course, I'm like freaking out because me and my mom were in the bed laying down watching TV, and the TV in the stand that it was in fell toward us, and things were just moving all over. Thankfully, the storm picked us up, set us back down. The trailer wasn't damaged, but it was moved off its foundation. And there was some internal damage as well. So survived that. I was always afraid of storms throughout my youth, but at some point in my teenage years and then going into high school, it kind of turned into a passion. And so I couldn't get enough of it. Like I watched the Weather Channel all the time and all of that. And that kind of led my decision to go into meteorology. And at the time, it was the decision between OU and Jackson State. And I chose Jackson State, and it was an excellent experience. Here's another series of radar images from the close call. So here's the pop quiz for you guys now. But there's 3 images here all side by side. They're just screen captures that show reflectivity and in radar. Now, I should actually be asking you guys these questions. But I live in the red dot as this very strong, you guys can tell me, what is that? What is this indication here? Anybody? It's a mesocyclone. That's an incredibly intense mesocyclone that moved just south of where I used to live. And so we were at home when this happened. The power went out before the storm hit, which was automatically a bad sign. Usually the power goes out during the height of the storm. In this case, it went out before the storm hit. The cell moved south of us. And then after the storm passed, we went down just about 5 minutes down the major street that I live on, and there was damage everywhere. It's just amazing, incredible. But there's a problem. I mean, it's obvious that I'm in harm's way here with this mesocyclone just passing just to the south. But there's another aspect that I kind of want to point out that's actually relevant to anyone who storm chases. Anyone storm chase? Raise your hands. What's the problem with being in between this mesocyclone and the foreflank? There's actually probably several of them, but this is the quiz, by the way. This is what I was going to ask you guys about. So, and I actually want to diagram something on the board too, if you guys don't know or don't have an idea. Anybody?
Oh, it might be kind of hard to see what's going on. Number one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one. Do we have others? Now, some of you guys up here are disqualified because we talked about it this morning. So I don't want you guys to answer. I want someone else to answer for me. Anybody? Once, twice? Okay. I'll just go ahead and just draw it up here. What are you saying?
Maybe some chemical.
Yep, that's a good answer. Well, what happens is with often, not always, but often with supercells like this is you have a cell here. Brief intro on the supercell dynamics. Usually if there's a tornado in the cell, it's somewhere in this general vicinity. But when they move, they move in the general direction of the movement of the parent storm. But when they weaken, sometimes what happens is they actually occlude and turn to the left. So if this thing had to turn to the left on its trajectory, I would have had major problems. I might not even be here to tell you about it, actually. There were people that passed away in this storm. But it's fascination for me. You know, I looked at the local news and reported out to my family, told them this is going to be bad. About 2 hours before it happened, you know. But this was the event where my family began to listen and realize, oh, if he says something's happening, you need to start listening. So anyway, I moved past that now. So. All right. Okay, so I went through my undergraduate degree at Jackson State, and that was my first immersion in meteorology. I couldn't really get enough learning about it leading up to my experience at Jackson State. I got an internship with the Weather Service, and I eventually got into SCEP, which is now called Pathways, and that's something I'll touch on a little bit more in my advice part of this presentation. But after that, I went to the University of Oklahoma. I was employed at the Storm Prediction Center the whole time while I was at OU. I got my master's and my Ph.D. in December of 2014. And I don't really like to brag, but I showed this is so important. What happened when I got this Ph.D. was a generational thing for my family. We've had some people that tried but didn't go far enough, but they still got masters and did okay in their careers. But my grandfather there in the upper left was a sharecropper. Anybody know what a sharecropper is? It's like the next thing from slavery. Seriously. And 2 generations later, here I am with a Ph.D. in meteorology, getting interviewed by the Weather Channel for Black History Month. It was a big moment for my family. And so I love them. They celebrated. We all had a good time when graduation rolled around. And then since then, I've actually moved on to the Storm Prediction Center, as you guys know, and now actually the Weather Prediction Center there in College Park. So you guys have talked about SPC before, so I won't spend too much time on what they do, but I will tell you a little bit about my perspectives at OU. At SPC. I was actually there when they opened the building at 2016, and this is a pretty popular picture that was shown around a lot when the building was first opened. SPC protects life and property by issuance of timely and accurate watch and forecast products dealing with tornadoes, hail, and other hazardous weather. Here's an example of a tornado watch. And again, I know there's severe weather winds in this department, so I won't belabor the point, but essentially there's watches that go out that are issued by the units. Usually the lead forecaster issues this product, but sometimes he can actually delegate that information, delegate that task whenever things are really busy. There's also categorical outlooks, and here's an example of all of the colors and all of the categories on that one map. This has undergone several changes over the years to try to improve risk communication via the changing of the categories and refining of the categories to make them more detailed. And then there's mesoscale discussions, which I actually did a whole lot of. Here's an example there on the left, and then an example of a discussion there. This was in advance of the Moore tornado in 2013. And then I also did fire weather outlooks, which I think are actually kind of an underrated product in my opinion. They get overshadowed a lot by the severe convective outlooks. But whenever you see extreme on a fire weather outlook, that is a big deal. And some of these outlooks have actually foreshadowed like these large moving fire fronts that can burn entire towns down, burn farmsteads down. These can be incredibly destructive. And they're usually supported by really dry atmospheric conditions and strong winds, 50 miles an hour or greater. So you can imagine, as long as you have dry vegetation at the ground that can carry fires, those fires can move quickly as we quickly through a region or in a given location. All right, so when I was at SBC and working through my Ph.D. program, I actually did research on the El Nino, the relationship between El Nino and tornadoes in the early winter and early spring. Sorry. And I won't go into the details. I will say though, this research is kind of dated. At the time, El Nino, La Nina was a big deal, and it still kind of is. And it does influence the weather in the warm and early spring, which is part of motivation for this work. But there's so many more forcings and factors, SST forcings from other regions of the world, other oscillations, and AO can be a big one, especially for the central and eastern U.S. But the focus here at this point was on El Nino, La Nina. And the general takeaway is that during La Nina, generally speaking, on almost all of these quantities that can gauge tornado risk, La Nina tends to be the most active of all of the phases of the insult phenomenon in terms of tornado activity in the U.S. I actually paired these statistics with an atmospheric, kind of like a climatology of synoptic forcings that actually tied into the tornado outbreaks, things like low-level jets. Trying to think, it's escaping my mind. It's a 500 pattern. Yeah, geopotential heights, things like that. And I kind of tied that information in and also looked at, like, the strength of the low-level jet, the strength of mid-level jet streaks in these individual outbreaks, and not compare them among the months to try to look at differences. So it's important not to just rely on statistical analyses for these types of deductions, because the statistics are only as good as the underlying data. And as we all know, the farther back you go in time, the more unreliable the tornado data set becomes. So it's important to look at other factors to kind of support these types of trends and shifts. And that's what I was able to do with this research. That publication is online, and because my audience is primarily students, I kind of want to relay that this was a really important set of work for me for a lot of reasons. This actually initially started as a term paper for a climate dynamics class. And I actually worked with my former director, Joe Schaefer, who's since passed away, unfortunately, and also Pete Lamb, who also passed away. But we worked together, the three of us, to actually do a publication while I was in my master's program, separate from my master's thesis. And it was big for me to actually do that, because in a way it kind of announced to the meteorology community that I'm coming from Jackson State to the University of Oklahoma, but I'm capable of making valuable contributions to the field of meteorology. And there's something that was in doubt. There's kind of like this going thing or this assumption out there that I think is false, but that if you went to, an HBCU, or maybe you went to an inner city urban, school system for your primary education, that maybe you can't do the high level of work that some of the other meteorologists with different backgrounds can, but I've proven it wrong. And so I want to bring this up to mention that there may be times in your career when you have to kind of overcome certain barriers that come up. But the way to do it, I think, and what's worked for me, is to be creative and think a little bit outside of the box about different aspects of meteorology that can be improved upon. It's an evolving field and evolving science. That's really important to kind of keep it moving forward and also benefit your other colleagues. I mean, I brought a lot of gosh, I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm having like short-term memory things right now, but I brought a lot of visibility, I think, to this problem by publishing this research and then completing it for my dissertation with new information added. So I have a few observations from SBC. A lot of people focus on the big events on the big days or whenever there's a big impact. maybe a local impact on a not so big day, but it just happened to hit the wrong spot. I'd argue that every severe weather day isn't an outbreak. There's almost always some parameter space somewhere in the country, especially in spring and early summer, that can support severe weather, but not all of them are big days. And it's also really straightforward. I can't tell you how many stories and anecdotes over the years where, big outbreaks where it was uncertain that there was going to be a big outbreak all the way up until the time that it happened. And yet there ended up being a big forecast that actually covered the event well. So it's very challenging to be a forecaster and to sit in the seat every day and to issue products, in advance of any kind of severe weather threat, let alone the so-called big days. Some of those aren't really apparent until they actually happen. There's also the issue of deadlines. In the mesoscale discussions back then were actually supposed to be issued about an hour before any convective watch goes out. That doesn't always happen because things happen that are unanticipated. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And then there's also like a tie into the convective outlets as well, in that this information needs to have some type of consistency with what's already been said in the convective outlook to an extent. Now, if the convective outlook is outdated, or something is happening in the atmosphere that doesn't necessarily match the outlook, then yes, this can probably stray from that a little bit, but eventually the outlook will catch up because it's updated 5 times a day during the day one period. And in general speaking, this is kind of how I picked up the practice of moving quickly through the process of starting and finishing an MPD and getting it out. Usually this text and that graphic is generated between 15 and 30 minutes of time. And it's important to have that speed, especially when things are evolving quickly and we need to convey that information out to a broad variety of end users. They can be broadcasters, they can be students, they can be field offices. Those are the mainly people that we target as the field officers for these projects. But there's 3 parts. There's a section that talks about what is happening. Then there's a section that talks about the surrounding environment and what's supporting the ongoing severe weather threat, if there's an ongoing severe weather threat. And then this last section is a forecast. What's going to happen in the next 1 to 2 or 6 hours? And how will we handle that? Will we issue a watch? Will we need to continue a watch? Will an outlook be upgraded because of the ongoing scenario? That's the type of information that an MD normally has. Okay, we'll talk a little bit, I think, about the storm chasing aspect of this. And this is actually my picture. I used to live 7 minutes away on a line from one of the elementary schools that got hit. So storm chasing is kind of hard for me sometimes because I actually enjoy the science behind this type of weather phenomenon. But on that day, I couldn't enjoy it because I was calling people, I was warning people, I was calling folks back in Little Rock to let them know that I was okay, but that something big was about to happen. There was probably going to be, national breaking news or whatever. But to hear the roar of this storm was just absolutely incredible. It was one of the loudest tornadoes I've ever heard. And I didn't really sleep that night. It's one of the aspects, like we talked about earlier, about, stress after a storm event. As a forecaster, or even as someone that just understands the magnitude of what just happened. That was a tough one for me. So I don't have any video of it just because of the fact that it was too close to home. But I do have some other ones that were a little bit more enjoyable. And I have a few screen captures here. Now the first 2 were on a day. There's one cell there in about 7,000 Cape. Very unstable. This is an extremely strong updraft. And as we were driving alongside it, you can actually see, different rotors on the sides of the updraft. This updraft is punching up through the atmosphere. But it's also rotating. You can see this band that's extending from the foreplate, wrapping into the mesocyclone, and that vorticity ingest. You can actually kind of imply that from the picture. Yeah. There's been some other events as well. This was a nighttime chase. I actually happened to be near Dallas, Texas, around Christmas time while I was making my way back up to Oklahoma. And I heard that there were some tornadoes in the Dallas area. And so I decided to just take a jog just to the north and kind of follow everything as it was evolving. And I just can't overstate the amazing electricity around a storm, even at night, where you know it's rotating, you know there's damage going on the ground because there's power flashes and stuff that's illuminating this big broad base that's, you know, almost like a spaceship is rotating over neighborhoods. But then as I followed that storm, another one actually touched down on the gust front, did a handoff. And so what you see there on the lower left here is weakening meso there and a separate tornado that was also significant. I think the first one on the left might have been rated 4, and then the one on the right might have been rated 2. And then here on the right, there's actually a friend of mine there taking a picture up in Dodge City. We drove up there to see a tornado. And that was one of the more picturesque tornadoes I think I've ever seen, or a series of tornadoes rather, in an isolated supercell all by itself. I mean, it was really amazing to see. And so I have some video if people are interested. Let's see. Here we go. It just came right up. Okay, so this was a day where I saw 2 violent tornadoes in the same chase. I'd actually argue that they're both 2 F5s. Some people might disagree with me on that. The official record says 4, but this tornado actually slabbed a hurricane-proof home that was built to withstand 200-mile-an-hour winds. Just slabbed it, and all the home was just spread out into pieces way downfield from where the tornado actually hit. And while we were watching this storm, the camera doesn't necessarily show it, but there was a tree, a mature tree with the root system still intact, floating about 8/10 of the way up, all the way to the car cloud almost, just floating like a piece of paper. It was just amazing. But this one, we actually left the first cell that was in the Chickasha area and drove south to see this one. And there weren't a lot of chasers on it, but then we actually encountered a situation where a handoff happened. And so the road we were on, a tornado that formed almost on the road we were on, just a few minutes to our south. And so we had to get out of there from this position to go back and look. And when we looked back, there was this one that was weakening, and another tornado forming on either side of the road. So it was incredible. I will say storm chasing is dangerous. You have to be careful, and it's good to do it in groups and not alone. But it's still fascinating. And to me, one of the things I like about storm chasing is that it really, I've seen a lot of supercells on radar behind the computer screen, but it really brought home what that radar screen represents when I'm looking at it at work, as opposed to looking at it out in the field. Not just what it looks like, but also what damage it could potentially do to the people involved. So it was like in a way, it was kind of like a rounding out of some of my education and learning about severe convective storms at the local level. And I have another, let's see. Well, the browser's up to date, that's good. Let's go back. Try it again. Come on, guys. Okay. There we go. So this was a separate supercell that was actually on this. Oh no, this is not it. I'm sorry, guys. Oh no, that's it. Okay, so this is just northeast of Chickasha. And forgive me, this has been about what, 11 years since I took this video? It's been a while. A lot has happened since then. Sure. This is right after a touchdown over the city of Chickasha, and then it began to kind of ride into a big monster. You know, it was a serious tornado. This one also snapped homes. And so that's why I can look at it as like, well, snapped homes that are well constructed. That's what the initial intent of the computer scale was about. That's an F5. That's what we described in F5. But they got rated F4. I know there was a lot of internal information on that. But on this year, of 2011, there were many candidates of that 5 tornadoes that were rated for immediately after. So that's something that people might be looking back at for a long time. Because that season was just so historic. I'll just skip ahead on this and I keep moving forward to the next, see how big it'll get on that point. Also, a little less visible. There was some rain from the rapid around it. And there was also some rain from the angle from the storm to the south and west of us. That was also, that was the video I just showed you. So, not bad. There's more online actually. If you want to take a peek, or if you need them later, I can show you more. All right, now on to WPC. And so my transition to here began about 17 months ago. It's gone really well. WPC is probably 2 to 3 times the size of SPC. Some large center, and they do a lot more than just severe convective storms, which is what SPC is primarily focused on. So you can't see that, but there's extreme precipitation forecasting, including rainfall and snow and ice. I'm more so on the rainfall part of that. Sometimes it takes a while to actually learn different desks. And so even though I have winter weather in my background, I just haven't gotten around on that desk yet. So that's why I focus on the Mesosphere discussions. But there's also desks that deal with extreme temperature from heat to cold. There's a lot of social media posts if you follow the Weather Prediction Center. They talk about which areas are getting cold or frost or freeze this time of year, especially. And then also in the summer to talk about heat as well. WPC provides the foundation of the national weather story. See that graphic on the lower left? That's what they call the GOODS. And this is actually used by, forecasters and meteorologists for briefings of high level executives in the government. FEMA actually uses the graphic a lot as well to kind of have an understanding of what the weather threats are going to be for the day in their specific regions. WPC has also been doing surface weather map analysis for the past 150 years, and that tradition goes on strong. And they also back up for the Hurricane Center. For active systems, whenever the Hurricane Center has trouble disseminating a product, that actually happened this summer. And then also whenever a system makes landfall and becomes more of a flash flood threat than a wind and storm surge threat, then the Weather Prediction Center comes in and starts doing advisories. So there's a major focus on precipitation, again with rainfall and snow and ice. And the big takeaway from here is that WPC is the national center and expertise for extreme precipitation of all kinds. They also do QPF, which is a very interesting product, but essentially it forecasts precipitation for the entire country in 6-hour bins, usually after 3 days. And then there's a separate desk that actually does that type of forecast after 5 days. Collaboration is a huge part of this product, and it is collaborated with several local forecast offices and within the entire end of this field structure. Even the river forecast offices sometimes will ask for information or give input on the forecast because they can impact their forecast for river flooding downstream. The forecast extends out to 7 days from initial time. And there's 2 desks that actually do that. There's the lead forecaster, or the SBF, which I actually trained to do that desk recently. And then also the medium range forecaster that does the next few days after that. And then there's other rainfall services as well. So there's PQPF. And I admit I don't have a ton of experience with it just because I'm so new to a lot of the desks and there's so many more functions. But then there's also the ERO, which I've done a lot of work with recently to actually translate that into a improved risk communication forecast. And we'll talk a bit about that actually. I can shoot a few slides to kind of show the information as well. And then what I primarily do is mesoscale precipitation discussions. And then there's also an extreme precipitation monitor that's pretty heavily automated, but there's a website available for that shows different ARIs of historical climatology compared to the current radar current rainfall forecast. Again, part of the reason why my transition to WPC has been so successful is because I've been doing MPDs, or MDs rather, for the past several years. And so the only difference between an MD at SBC and an MPD at WPC is the fact that there's actual hydrological component. It's not just enough to say that there's going to be heavy rain in the area, but it's also important to articulate whether that heavy rain will be occurring on rocky soils that support a lot of runoff to support flash flooding, or if it's falling in an area that typically can handle a lot of rain. And so because it can handle a lot of rain, there may not be much of a flash flood threat at all. So the same three parts: what's currently happening, what's the environment supporting the ongoing flash flooding scenario, and then also what will happen. And usually there's some introduction of the hydrological conditions in this part of the MPD. Now, the environment is actually kind of interesting too, because at SBC, we're focused more on, will the environment support severe tornado weather, hail, and damaging wind gusts. Here, it's more so of a, will the environment support repeated rainfall over a specific area for a length of time? And so that has to do with like training. MCSs can be actually really important in this type of an evolution of the flash flood threat as well. And so we're not just looking at, the fact that the environment has, 3,000 K and 2 inches of PW. It's a little deeper than that. So it's actually, and things that you also can't really easily quantify either. Like, are storms going to grow upscale and then sweep through the area? Or are they going to kind of hang back and train, redevelop over the same area? All of that has an impact on the mesoscale precipitation discussions. And these are also a little bit more detailed than the outlooks by necessity, because the outlooks cover flash flood risks over a 24-hour period, theoretically, sometimes longer or shorter. But there could be details in there in the mesoscale environment that evolve quickly, and the ERO may not cover that. So the MPD is a really important part of the product suite, and that's what I currently do. So I want to show you guys this presentation that I gave when I was at the National Weather Association back annual meeting in August back in Pittsburgh. Again, I think it's a really important part of helping to translate what outlooks mean to emergency managers, to people who are concerned with IDSS, to other forecasters in the field, and to anyone who actually has a general interest or dependent on weather information to make decisions. And so this is the first slide. I just talked a bit about the SBC to WPC transition. But one of the things that came up actually in Hurricane Ida is that there were several questions asked internally about the high risk here, and how frequent it is for this area to get a high risk. Is that one of the largest high risks we've ever seen? How does it relate to other high risks that we've seen in this area? And so I saw those questions, and I'd already kind of looked at maybe taking some of the high risk dates to actually kind of feed back into my dissertation to see if there's a way I could kind of look at, synoptic classes of high risk areas or synoptic patterns, classes of synoptic patterns, and it resulted precipitation in a particular area. So I had all these different questions kind of come in. So I decided to extend the high risk climatology that was already available that our WCM, Alex Lamers, did, and actually build out several stats and analytics and then post them here on the web. And so essentially what we have here is a list of high, moderate, and slight risk days separated out by state, CWA, and metro areas. And then there's also a series of downloads and helpful links, like some flash flood tips, safety tips, for anyone to use. If you ever, give a talk and someone wants to know about flash flood risk, you can point to this page and there's information available there. But when I went to NWA, one of the things I kind of found is that the EMs that I've talked to love this information because it lists out an area or it gives out a list of high risk days, moderate risk days, and slight risk days for the geographic area that they're responsible for. So now they can go back and say, well, if we know from the past that these days have produced this type of flash flooding, now we can actually go back and develop objective response criteria, based on what happens with the ERO. And then some people actually, WS headquarters came up to me during the conference and said, hey, this is great. We can use this for IDSS and, for risk communication. So I look at it as a really big resource for risk communication, real in a broader sense. But it does so by actually looking at what happened in the past when certain high risks were in effect. And this is actually going to be expanded upon substantially now that the rainfall hazards are relatively quiet compared to what they could be for this time of year. So I'm working on that in the background. Here's a few our statistics. Again, our peak during the year is July, August, September, and then after that, things tend to drop off in October and November. So I feel so guilty about leaving the other forecasters back at home in Maryland while I'm out having fun giving this presentation. But also the same, in general speaking, we issue 3 to 4 times more slight risk than moderates and 4 times more moderates than highs. Highs are rare, but they're also a really big deal. If you see a high risk in the ERO, know that somebody is probably going to have a big problem with flash flooding. And that's where a lot of the extreme events can actually happen as well. Again, I broke this information out by CWAs, states, and metro areas. And then I created like a list of top 10 active NVS offices based on our risk days. Now, the interesting thing about this part of the country here in the South is that there's been several hurricane landfalls that have actually heightened the numbers here locally. Hurricane Harvey was a big one back in 2017. Hurricane Harvey contributed to about 7 different high-risk days down in that part of the country from Texas up through Western Tennessee. There's also high risk for atmospheric rivers, and then there's also high risk that get issued for tropical cyclones when they make landfall there in the Carolinas as well. But there's also, a few numbers here that are attributed to just mid-latitude systems that move through. Often what happens there is you get these big, large, synoptic systems that have these warm fetches off the Gulf of Mexico, and there's precip that repeats over the same areas and can do so for many hours. The same phenomenon is actually the case for atmospheric rivers with the major source for moisture there being the Pacific. So also, as a brag of my coworkers, the average ERO size of the high in the ERO has been decreasing over time. And so I suspect there might be some, there's a lot of, I won't go into the details on why I think this might be the case, but I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that over the years, we've done a lot better with our higher resolution modeling. And that's probably a big factor in why these risk areas are shrinking. In fact, we've only had 1 high risk day this year, which is low. Usually by this time of year, we've had 10 already. There's also, again, to answer the question that was sparked by Irma, I went back and looked at the largest high risks going back to 2016, and then I'll plot them all here. Again, some of them are just tied to tropical systems when they make landfall and move through parts of the country. But then others are actually tied to mid-latitude systems. It's kind of rare to get a tropical system in Oklahoma. So there's 2018 was actually the largest on record, and that's not a tropical system. That's actually just a mid-latitude system that caused all that. So there's more information here, but I show this, and I have a few pointers to kind of give you guys to take with you as you move on through your career. Here's a few tips for success. Blend your skills, curiosity, and creativity to benefit those around you and to benefit yourself. And the project that I did, and one of the reasons why I like working at NCEP so much as a forecaster, is that there's time to actually build out some of these projects when the weather's quiet. And I use my skills in my Ph.D., some programming, to actually kind of accomplish that. So let me move this Yeah. So, I've done that with the ERO practice, and it's already getting a lot of traction. And there's people that really like it, and they're really enthusiastic about it. So I'm going to keep building that to kind of show that I can make a unique contribution to the unit to push the unit forward. And that's what I want to kind of leave with you guys is as you're going through these dynamics courses, you're learning Python, you're learning all these different skill sets. Be sure to keep in mind that there's a number of ways, to use that information to contribute to projects that help out the unit. And I think that's how you can actually get ahead moving forward. So that's something to keep in mind. And it requires a little bit of work. Sometimes, I go beyond 40 hours a week, to work on some of this, but I love it. I enjoy it. It's something I can say I'm passionate about, and people recognize it too. So that's good. I think you guys have a programming language already in your curriculum. That's good. That's really good. Also, there's internship programs. If you decide to apply for pathways, I'm willing to review a resume and actually know someone in the weather service that kind of helps with that as well. So feel free to email me if you have questions. Let's see. You can actually be a little creative. Not every student opportunity is pathways. There's summer internships and all that kind of stuff. But take a look at the publications list at SBC, WPC, I think might have one. I'll go back and look. But look at the types of work that people are working on and see if you bring some type of value to that project. That's what I would recommend. So a lot of people lately have been working. I'm aware of a project at SBC actually where they're looking at tornado genesis. And when I was there, I actually helped advocate to get a student on to help. It's not a paid position, but at least you're working with forecasters at the SBC and you're showing people in the field, maybe future hiring officials in the future, that you're eager to learn, you're gaining skills, and you're gaining value all the time by having these interactions. And as long as you do a good job with it, I think it can help boost your hireability, I guess you could say, and promotability too. And then also, this is a big one, seek out professionals and mentors to learn from. When I made that first publication back in 2006 from that climate dynamics class, there were two advocates that were helping me to push to get that out. My old professor would brag that he had publications coming out of his term papers from his class, but it's good to have that. I mean, if he's bragging on you, that's a good thing. It probably means that he's bragging to others about you as well, which can open doors for you moving down the line. So it's always important to be professional, find mentors, advocates, learn from them, do good work, be creative, and solve problems. That's the other real big thing, I think, in career, in terms of career progression. Be sure to solve problems and try to use that to help move it forward. Soft skills are always beneficial. I'm not, I've been a little social awkward at times, so I've had to learn through a few things myself. But a lot of it's practice for me at least. So, and also you've heard this before, I'm sure, but attend conferences to network with other professionals and then also try to stand out as well. So side projects can do that. Publications always help. I know that's asking a lot really to be in a master's program and to have a separate publication, but sometimes that type of activity can actually help boost you. And I feel like it actually helped put me on the map to the point where they actually wanted to accept me in the PhD program. And I'm not so sure that would have been the case if I hadn't made the publication. So, and yeah, I already mentioned it, but advocates and mentors as well. So my outlook on meteorology, there's three main ways to go about it. It's the public sector, private sector, and also broadcast, but it is super competitive. So keep that in mind as you're moving through the process, that you'll need ways to stand out. Maybe the highest GPA or being known as the smartest in the class, that could be one way. Doing a project that a lot of people get eyes on, that can be important. In the public sector, the Weather Service is a big hiree of meteorologists, but there are also other agencies out there as well. I know several colleagues that with the FEMA as well, a few other agencies as well. So A lot of the growth is actually occurring in the private sector still. And it requires not just the applications of the meteorology, but actually not just the raw meteorology, but actually to translate the meteorology into a series of products or something that a business can use. So if I gave you a forecast, you might say, oh, well, that's great, but how do we use it? But if I say, but this forecast affects your bottom line by X, Y, Z, then they look and say, oh, now they want more interest in making. So that's something to keep in mind as well with private sector, whereas I think in the weather service, I still have one of the jobs that actually requires meteorology, and it's just meteorology focused. So I feel really fortunate. Really blessed. Do broadcast meteorology, and I don't think this is a problem. A lot of newer broadcasters are using social media like crazy, but a lot of people are not watching TV in the regular channels like they do anymore. They're looking at Facebook, Twitter, and so having that ability to engage people on social media is really important and to build a following and leadership that way. And then there's also academia. I've given some thought to academia because I like this type of interaction. And I welcome your questions, by the way, once this is over. But the key jobs require a Ph.D. There's also tenure you have to work toward, and that can be a big deal for some universities. And then also science funding can be a challenge at times, but I think we're in a pretty good place there. Maybe some others can kind of inform that. I'm not really in the hunt for funding, but I have actually contributed to grants before, and I just wanted to do it to get the experience. So. Okay, I'll stop here. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask me. And there's also my email address if you have questions after the fact. I'm always available. So I'm here to help.
I was just going to ask, sort of a simple question, but what particular event got you into meteorology? If it was growing up, for example.
Yeah, it was that event. It was the tornado that hit me when I was 3. So I'm just gonna wipe my sweat real quick.
No, you're good.
But yeah, I was afraid of storms. I was afraid of storms, but I always followed them. Like back then, you know, I followed the local broadcasters whenever there was weather moving through Central Arkansas, and I always tried to follow the warnings in like that little box in the lower left corner of the screen with the map that shows them. And I would kind of extrapolate out where the storms are going to move to, and if some was going to move like kind of close to us. So yeah, it was just fascinating. I'd go out and kind of look at clouds and try to assess which ones were going to be dangerous or not. It's kind of hard to do in Arkansas because of some of the trees, but of course, once I got out to other areas, it was a little bit different from there. But like Oklahoma, for instance, you can see for miles. Actually, not a lot of people noticed, but I did a small, brief storm chase when I was in Illinois 2 months ago. And there was a supercell with tornado warnings on it, and I actually knew a guy in Quad Cities at the office there. And I saw it, and I was like, well, you know, I'm here. I might as well just go storm spot, but I'll let you know if I see anything. It was mainly elevated and all that. But yeah, in a way, it's kind of a service to go out and do that. You're saying that.
Can you say anything about how much you get to sort of direct what kind of development work that you do when you don't have operational stuff? Like, can you just do what you're interested in, or how does that work?
I choose. I've always been the type to try to pick something that relates directly to the unit. And with the ERO project that I'm doing, I saw a unique way to convey meaning to the EROs beyond what was already existing. Like, and the other aspect of it too is that there's no one centralized location to actually look at past EROs and past reports and to kind of gauge the severity of flooding, how much rain fell, when the ERO was in place, and all that. So it's just an idea, and now it's kind of spreading. It's usually how research does, and usually how it goes with me. Like even with the ERO, the INSO tornado work that I did, you know, over a decade ago, is like I have an idea, and I remember actually my former director at SPC telling me, he said, you know, you're pretty lucky to have found this because we looked at it and we didn't find it, but there was a clear trend there, you know. But it's just ideas. I guess it's a gift, maybe, just that I have certain ideas that just kind of come to mind when I work on them, and they kind of, you know, they end up almost always get bigger than I thought they would be, you know. So And by the way, if anyone wants more information on the ERO project, I'm happy to share. There's some areas where I'm expanding at that I think a student could be really helpful if you want to learn. So.
So regarding the EROs, I believe this year, day 4 and day 5 experimental outlooks were issued. So like, what was the motivation behind that?
Just longer lead times, I think. I can't really speak to that because I don't really work that desk, but it's the medium range desk that does that. They already do QPF, so it's kind of like a natural thing to just add the EROs to that. But if you want to know the answer to it or who could speak to, I know specifically the guy. His name is Mike Chattel. So when if you get a chance, just email me. I can make an introduction if you want.
So we've done quite a bit of forecasting both from the SPC point of view and from the WPC point of view, both on the outlook side and the MD side. So that forecast process, can you speak to the similarities or differences between your approach in doing one or the other?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of similarities. And that's probably the reason why I picked the job up so quickly is because it's a lot of it similar. It's just, one focuses on severe convection and the other is heavy rainfall. But the differences kind of come in the way the actual staffing is structured. Like at WPC, I'm the only person responsible, well, in most cases, I'm the one responsible for the mesoscale discussions to go out for heavy rainfall. And so I have responsibility for the whole country. Well, if you can envision a scenario where there's, MCSs all over the place because there's more moisture everywhere and maybe a hurricane landfall, I got to write for all of that. So it's important to kind of manage time and juggle those responsibilities. And it's also kind of important to, like I kind of showed you guys here, I wouldn't stress it enough, but it's important to kind of have a template in mind as I'm going through, It's important to have a template in mind as I'm going through the process of creating the MDs because this streamlines the process and can help me get it out quickly so that I can pivot to the next step in a timely manner. So yeah, those are the two main ones. And also when we were at SBC, at least one other person read your product before it went out. And so there's always this notion or question of, we have a watch out and the watch has this probability. Is your MD in line with that? If so, why? If not, why not? May not necessarily be the wrong thing, but if so, why? If not, why not? But we don't have watch responsibility at WPC, at least not yet. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but because of that, this is more of a kind of like its own product in a way. And there's not the collaboration, I think, is more with WPC, happens more with the field. There is some internal collaboration that happens sometimes, but the desks at WPC are really diverse. And so you have this, but you also have someone focused on winter weather, and it has nothing to do with heavy rainfall or flash flooding necessarily. So it can be really different. And I don't know, probably a little, certainly busier at WPC. Whereas at SBC, you have a shared responsibility for the MDs because there's usually another meso forecaster, and then sometimes even a lead can pitch in and write one or two. So those are the key differences. I will say too, these products usually go anywhere from 3 to 6 hours. At SBC, the forecasts go out for an hour and then that's it. Once they expire, there's not necessarily a pressure or a desire to keep issuing MDs necessarily. I do know right before I was leaving, there was kind of a push to issue more of them just because there was the demand from the field. But here, I think these products, the MPDs, are a little more comprehensive because they go out for 6 hours and they cover so many more threats. But it seems like flash flooding can be a little more frequent of a threat than severe was. Plus, with the national coverage, it can be a challenge to keep all that together. So.
I don't think you have to be a professional or an upperclassman to understand that with each forecaster, there's sort of a different mindset at play. So between forecasters, obviously things get a little bit subjective. So how much do you think subjectivity sort of lends to a barrier in our ability to forecast?
Uh, that's a good question. And I have a few thoughts, but this is an incredibly nuanced question because there's just so many different, I mean, mindset, mood, that the previous forecast work out, that can play into the next day. If you miss something, then next day you might be more aggressive, to try to cover threats to prevent that from happening again. But I try to, it's hard because these particular products are very free form might not, because there's specific criteria we're supposed to meet to make sure that flash flood threats are covered. But I'm trying to articulate this the best way I can. They're not free form, but they're kind of they're unscheduled, or they're unscheduled. And so I can kind of make the determination as to whether an area needs written on or not. But I can also take into account, where the heavy rainfall is falling, if it's an area that's susceptible or not. If there's a city involved, cities tend to flash flood faster than rural areas, or people tend to notice them more than rural areas. That can be a big thing with tornadoes for sure. And so that plays a role into the forecasting. And also the perceived severity, like some of them are slam dunks. Like if you're going to get 2 inches of rain in an hour for 3 hours in Chicago, get that covered. but if it's going to be 1 inch in an hour, but the threat's going to move, then now there's some other considerations to make. Was it wet the day before? Has it been wet? Has there been a drought? If there's a drought, then maybe the ground can actually hold all the water, and maybe you don't get the excessive rainfall, as opposed to if you've already had flooding the previous day. But it's forecasting, and there's people involved. There's rotating shifts. There's stuff that goes on at home. There's, if you're worried about a threat at home, moving through your neighborhood, you may not look at another threat that's 300 miles away. They could be just as significant. And so that's when that happens. That's when I look at the desk at SPC as more of like a support type as part of a team, because what happens is everyone's focused on the big tornado in southern Oklahoma, but nobody's looking at Kansas. I go to the lead and I say, well, hey, you need to take a look at this area. Don't forget we got something else going on here, and try to help maintain that situational awareness. So yeah, there's so many factors, and it's just hard to answer that question in just one concise statement, because there's just so much that goes on in the forecast. But yeah, hopefully I answer your question though.
So if you asked a lot of us in here, they'd have a similar origin story of some sort of severe weather event. And maybe some think that when they go out to their career, they're going to be forecasting severe weather every day. What happens if all of a sudden you're forecasting fire weather, or in your case, mesoscale convective systems for rainfall? Do you have any advice on kind of learning new skills and being flexible in your career?
Not really, other than just to do it. And make sure I'm seriously. I mean, I didn't necessarily anticipate the move to WPC when I first started out as a student at SPC, and at OU, but it's worked out, and as it turned out, a lot of the same forecast processes are happening there. But who knows? I mean, they may need help on a forecast office soon, and they send me out there, and if I do, then I'll just simply take what I learned at SPC, what I learned at WPC. And then I always was told to bloom where you plant it. So I feel like I'm confident enough in my abilities to bring value anywhere I go. And so I would just try to take that approach, but also be kind of humble and confident, humble at the same time, to know that there's other people that know more than me. So how can I learn from them, but at the same time take my skill sets and try to make it better for everyone and try to advance them. So that's kind of how I do it. Okay. Any other questions?
How significant is the usage of flash flood guidance in EROs and MPDs?
I use it pretty often, but I know we have a contrarian on the staff that doesn't like it. So I won't go into big detail on why, but I do know that it has to update pretty regularly, because ground conditions can change in 6 hours or 3 hours or 1 hour, even if you get a lot of rainfall. But I like to look at it just because it gives me a general idea of what areas are really flashy or can support flash flooding and which areas aren't as much. So when it comes to forecast philosophy, like that question came up, there's been some situations in the Southeast in Florida this summer where I held off on writing an MPD because the flash flood kind of suggested that you needed 4 inches in an hour to get any kind of flash flooding. But others wrote because they saw that there was 3 inches of rainfall an hour, you know. So I was fine with tolerating the risk that there may be a flash flood warning that comes out and I don't have a product covering it. But it depends really on the tolerance of the forecaster for that. So, and that's something that I didn't really cover that much, I guess, in the MPD is the hydrology part. But that, for me at least, the flash flood guidance covers, or is really important for me at least, to kind of help quickly assess what's happening and quickly assess how sensitive the ground conditions are. All right, any other questions or?
Did you work the St. Louis or Kentucky event this summer? Do you have any comments on your experiences?
Not, I think I've heard some anecdotes about Kentucky, but I didn't work either one of those. I think I might have worked Kentucky after the fact. But even after the fact, there were people doing water rescues over showers with 4-inch an hour rain rates. That's just how sensitive things got after all the rainfall had happened. So that's just an example of how like FFGs can capture some of that. But also like the sensitivity of the ground conditions can be huge for addressing some of the threats. But no, I didn't. There was also questions I got at NWA about the frequency of moderates in the ERO and how many days in a row a moderate happened and all that kind of stuff. So I actually went and just ran that. I don't have the stats with me today, but I know I think there were like 4 different days in a row with a moderate risk in Kentucky, which is not that common at all, especially for one local area. So.
Can you talk about student opportunities with the Weather Prediction Center? How often do you have students like in the office with you? Or I mean, obviously we have pathways. I see them a lot for the local WPOs, but not for the bigger ones, like the SBC and WPC.
Okay, so WPC does have a pathways position, and they just hired someone, if I recall correctly. So as those come up, I suspect they're probably really competitive, at least from my understanding of kind of how things work. Well, we passed in the shadow, depending on the forecaster or the personnel involved, there might be an opportunity to actually receive mentoring on a more frequent basis. I know when I was at SBC, I actually sat on a committee for a master's student, and I mentored in their RU program in the building. I've mentored several students through that program. And then I did an independent study with the university for a student too. So it really just depends on the forecaster in terms of the opportunity. So with that said, I guess if you are interested, then maybe ask. And I don't mind connecting to people, or I'm working on this ERO thing. I mean, I could use the help if you willing to spend a couple hours a week on it with me. So yeah, so that's all I got. But just email me and I can circulate around WPC and see what other people might say about that too. The other aspect is I'm new to WPC. When I was at SBC, I kind of understood what the job was and the flexibility I would have in certain times of the year. And we had 2 people doing meso discussions, so I could kind of offload that and then bring on the student to kind of just show them around ops and all that kind of stuff. At WPC, it's a little different because I'm the point guy for all the MPDs across all the country. So in the summer, I don't even try to do a lot extra. I just try to just focus on the job, and make sure that the MPDs are all out on time. But in times like this, when there's no rain, or there's a relative minimum of the rainfall, then I get more involved with the developmental projects and I try to help and do outreach and things like that. So that's a consideration for me, but I don't think that's the case for everybody. So my recommendation is just to find out who you're most interested with and ask around, because most people are willing to talk to you if you got questions like that. So Anybody else?
What's the weirdest or the most unexpected skill you develop that's actually useful in daily life?
I gotta think about that one. I don't know. I will say I've come a long way in my programming, just from years of doing it. That's been really helpful. And it made the ERO project that I worked on way faster than just doing this stuff by hand and drawing the areas and all that. Nothing to do it. But yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one. I gotta give that one some thought. That's a hard one. I think. You know, okay, I'll say this at the risk of maybe upsetting some people, but we all know that in meteorology, there's personalities. How to deal with that is important. I mean, we all have good bosses. We all have bosses that are a little bit challenging. You know, Ph.D. advisors can be the same way. It's just, but how do you deal with that? How do you handle it? I think that's where trusted mentors and advisees can come into play, because they can relay, hey, I've seen this in other situations. This is how I think you should handle it. You know, that sort of thing. So those soft skills, I guess you could say, are really important, because not everyone's easy to work with. I like to think I'm easy to work with, but I'm not in every place. And I'm first forwards too. So okay. Well, I'll just flash up my email just in case anyone has any other questions for me, and if I can be of assistance. And then that's all I have.
And of course, again, thanks to Dr. Cook for taking a lot of your time today. I know it's been a long day for you, and also round of applause for Dr. Wilson as well for coming in. So just want to remind you guys, that's it for us in terms of our meeting, but we do have another one. I think it's November the 9th. The 9th, and that's going to be a pretty big one too. We have James Spann joining us virtually, so I'm very excited. And that'll be at 6:30. So we'll keep you posted on that. That's all we got for you. So thanks for stopping by. I really appreciate it. And that's it. So thanks, guys. Thanks for that. Nice to meet you. Yeah, nice talking to you. So, like I said, any connection I can get means a lot. So absolutely.
Yes. We're just saying so much more, so we'll catch up.
Yeah.